You have been taught to judge men by their words, their promises, and their conscious behaviors. But what if everything you think you know about reading male character is keeping you trapped in cycles of disappointment and heartbreak? Sigmund Freud spent his life uncovering the hidden forces that truly drive human behavior, and his discoveries reveal that a man's real character lives not in what he shows you, but in what he desperately tries to hide from himself. Today, I'm going to share the 2 psychological keys that will allow you to see through any man's facade and recognize his true nature before you waste months or years discovering it the hard way, because your heart deserves to know the truth. From the very beginning, Freud revolutionized our understanding of human nature when he discovered that we are not who we think we are. The conscious mind, that voice in your head that seems so rational and controlled, is actually just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies the unconscious, a vast ocean of repressed desires, forgotten memories, and primitive impulses that truly drive our behavior. When you meet a man, you are not meeting his real self, you are meeting his carefully constructed persona. His true character lives in the shadows of his unconscious mind, and this is where you need to look if you want to see who he really is. Most women make the mistake of listening to what a man says about himself rather than observing what his unconscious reveals. A man might tell you he values honesty while unconsciously lying to himself about his own motivations. He might claim to be ready for commitment while his unconscious sabotages every relationship he enters. The unconscious operates by its own rules. It has no sense of time, no moral boundaries, and no capacity for deception. Unlike the conscious mind that can manipulate and perform, the unconscious always tells the truth about a person's deepest nature. The key to reading a man's true character lies in understanding that his unconscious will always find ways to express itself despite his conscious efforts to hide it. These expressions happen through his body language, his spontaneous reactions, his dreams he shares, his jokes, and his emotional responses when he thinks no one is watching. Freud taught us that the unconscious is like water. It will always find a crack through which to flow. When you learn to recognize these cracks, you gain access to information about his character that even he doesn't consciously know about himself. Freud identified defense mechanisms as the unconscious strategies our mind uses to protect us from uncomfortable truths about ourselves. In dating, men unconsciously employ these psychological shields to avoid confronting their own flaws, fears, and inadequacies. The most common defense mechanism you will encounter is rationalization, where he creates logical-sounding explanations for his questionable behavior. When he cancels dates last minute, shows up late, or treats you poorly, listen carefully to his excuses because they reveal how his mind works to protect his ego rather than take responsibility. Projection is another powerful defense mechanism that acts like a psychological mirror where he unconsciously attributes his own negative qualities to you or others. If he constantly accuses you of being untrustworthy, chances are he struggles with his own honesty. If he claims all women are manipulative, he is likely projecting his own manipulative tendencies onto the entire female gender. When a man projects, he is essentially confessing his own psychological crimes while pointing the finger at everyone else. This defense mechanism is particularly dangerous because it prevents him from developing self-awareness and genuine intimacy. Denial might be the most destructive defense mechanism in relationships because it involves completely rejecting reality when it threatens his self-image. A man in denial will refuse to acknowledge his drinking problem, his anger issues, or his pattern of hurting women. He will look you straight in the eye and convince himself that his version of events is the truth, even when evidence clearly contradicts him. Freud understood that denial is not conscious lying. It is the unconscious mind's way of preserving psychological stability by simply erasing uncomfortable facts from awareness. Transference is one of Freud's most profound discoveries about human relationships, and it holds the key to understanding why some men seem unable to love you for who you truly are. In transference, a person unconsciously transfers feelings, attitudes, and patterns from past relationships onto current ones, especially romantic partnerships. For men, the most significant transference usually stems from their relationship with their mother, and this unconscious dynamic will shape every romantic relationship he enters. When you are dating a man, you are not just dating him, you are also dating his internalized version of his mother and all the unresolved emotions attached to that primary relationship. Pay close attention to how he speaks about his mother, because this reveals the template for how he will eventually treat you. If he describes her as controlling, demanding, or suffocating, he will unconsciously expect you to become the same way, and may even provoke you into fulfilling this role. If he idealizes his mother as perfect and untouchable, you will never be able to compete with this impossible standard he has set for feminine worth. The man who has unresolved anger toward his mother will eventually direct that anger toward you, while the man who never separated from his mother psychologically will expect you to take care of him like she did. Transference operates completely outside of conscious awareness, which means he genuinely believes his reactions to you are based on your actual behavior rather than his psychological past. When he gets irrationally angry at you for something small, when he misinterprets your intentions, or when he seems to be fighting with a version of you that doesn't exist, transference is at work. Freud taught us that we cannot truly know someone until we understand their transference patterns, because these unconscious projections will determine the emotional climate of your relationship more than any conscious choice either of you makes. Freud discovered that there are no accidents when it comes to the things we say, and this principle becomes your most powerful tool for reading a man's true character. A Freudian slip occurs when the unconscious mind breaks through the conscious filter and reveals thoughts or feelings that were meant to remain hidden. When he calls you by his ex's name, when he accidentally says he doesn't want to see you when he meant to say he does, or when he makes a joke that cuts too deep, his unconscious is speaking directly to you. These slips are not random mistakes. They are windows into his authentic thoughts and feelings that his conscious mind is trying to suppress. Listen carefully to the words he chooses when he thinks he is being casual or spontaneous, because this is when his psychological guard is down. Notice what he says when he is tired, stressed, or distracted, as these are the moments when unconscious material is most likely to surface. Pay attention to his humor, because jokes often serve as socially acceptable ways to express forbidden thoughts and hostile feelings. When he makes cutting remarks disguised as teasing, when his compliments have subtle insults embedded within them, or when his stories consistently paint women in a negative light, his unconscious is revealing his true attitudes about femininity and relationships. The beauty of Freudian slips is that they cannot be faked or manipulated because they occur outside of conscious control. A man can rehearse what he wants to say to impress you. He can carefully manage his image and behavior, but he cannot control what his unconscious reveals through these spontaneous moments. Freud taught us that the unconscious will always find a way to express the truth, and slips of the tongue are one of its most reliable methods. When you learn to recognize and interpret these unconscious communications, you gain access to information about his character that is far more accurate than anything he could tell you intentionally. Freud revealed that every human psyche is a battlefield between three forces: the id, which represents our primitive desires, the superego, which embodies our moral conscience, and the ego which tries to mediate between them. In men, this internal war becomes particularly visible in romantic relationships where sexual desire, power dynamics, and social expectations collide. The id wants immediate gratification, sexual conquest, and dominance without considering consequences or morality. The superego demands he be respectful, committed, and morally upright according to social standards. When you observe a man carefully, you can see this battle playing out in real time through his contradictory behaviors and internal conflicts. Watch for moments when his primitive desires clash with his moral facade, because these reveal his true character structure. A man with a weak superego will consistently choose immediate gratification over long-term commitment. He will lie easily, cheat without genuine remorse, and prioritize his needs above yours without internal conflict. Conversely, a man with an overpowering superego might seem perfect on the surface, but will be rigid, judgmental, and unable to express genuine passion or spontaneity. The healthiest men have learned to integrate these forces, allowing appropriate expression of desire while maintaining ethical boundaries. But this integration is rare and requires significant psychological maturity. Pay attention to how he handles temptation, stress, and moral dilemmas, because these situations force his true character to surface. Does he become defensive and aggressive when his behavior is questioned, suggesting his id is dominant? Does he become paralyzed with guilt and shame over normal human desires, indicating superego tyranny? Or does he acknowledge his mistakes, take responsibility, and make genuine efforts to balance his needs with ethical behavior? Freud understood that character is revealed not in moments of ease, but in moments of internal conflict, when the different parts of the psyche are pulling in opposite directions. Freud discovered one of the most tragic aspects of human psychology: our unconscious compulsion to repeat painful patterns from our past, even when we consciously want something different. In relationships, repetition compulsion manifests as the tendency to recreate the same emotional dynamics, conflicts, and outcomes over and over again. When you look at a man's dating history, you are not just seeing his past, you are seeing a preview of your future with him. The man who has a pattern of relationships that end in betrayal, explosive arguments, or emotional distance will unconsciously work to recreate these same patterns with you, regardless of his conscious intentions or promises. This compulsion operates below the level of awareness, which means he genuinely believes each relationship failed due to external circumstances or the woman's flaws, rather than recognizing his own role in creating the pattern. He might tell you that all his exes were crazy, needy, or unreasonable, but what he is really revealing is his unconscious need to turn women into these roles. Freud taught us that we repeat what we do not remember or resolve, and most men have not done the psychological work necessary to break free from their unconscious programming. They are like actors, performing the same play over and over, convinced each time that this performance will have a different ending. The most dangerous aspect of repetition compulsion is that it feels familiar and therefore comfortable to the unconscious mind, even when it causes conscious suffering. A man who grew up with emotional chaos will unconsciously create chaos in his relationships because peace feels foreign and threatening to his psychological system. The man who experienced abandonment will unconsciously push women away before they can leave him. Understanding repetition compulsion gives you the power to predict future behavior based on past patterns, and more importantly, it helps you recognize when a man has done the inner work necessary to break free from his unconscious programming. Freud's most controversial yet illuminating theory reveals how a man's childhood relationship with his mother becomes the blueprint for all his future romantic relationships. The Oedipus complex describes the unconscious sexual desire a young boy feels toward his mother and the competitive hostility he feels toward his father. While this sounds shocking, Freud was describing the psychological dynamics that shape masculine development and the capacity for mature love. A man who successfully resolved his Oedipal phase learned to redirect his love toward appropriate partners, while maintaining respect for boundaries and authority. However, many men remain psychologically trapped in this childhood dynamic, making them incapable of genuine adult intimacy. Signs of an unresolved Oedipus complex appear clearly in how a man relates to women and authority figures. He might be unusually close to his mother, calling her daily, allowing her to interfere in his relationships, or comparing every woman to her impossible standard. Alternatively, he might be in complete rebellion against feminine authority, becoming hostile when women express needs or boundaries, or feeling emasculated by female success. These men often struggle with commitment because no woman can simultaneously be the nurturing mother figure they crave and the sexual partner they desire. They unconsciously divide women into categories: the pure maternal figure who must be protected from sexuality, and the sexual object who cannot be truly respected or loved. The most telling sign of Oedipal fixation is his relationship with male authority and competition. Men who never resolved this complex often struggle with other men, either becoming overly submissive to male authority or compulsively competitive in ways that sabotage their relationships and careers. In romantic relationships, he might unconsciously compete with you rather than partner with you, feeling threatened by your independence or success. Freud understood that the capacity for mature love requires a man to have psychologically separated from his mother while integrating both nurturing and sexual feelings toward the same woman. Without this integration, he remains emotionally stuck in childhood, seeking a mother rather than choosing a partner. Projection is perhaps the most dangerous defense mechanism you will encounter in dating because it turns a man's own psychological flaws into weapons against you. When a man projects, he unconsciously takes his own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors and attributes them to you, genuinely believing that you are the source of the problem. This creates a psychological hall of mirrors where he accuses you of exactly what he's guilty of doing. The man who cheats will become obsessively suspicious of your faithfulness. The man who lies will constantly question your honesty, and the man who manipulates will accuse you of being controlling and deceptive. What makes projection so insidious is that the man doing it truly believes his accusations because his unconscious mind has successfully relocated his shame and guilt onto you. He is not consciously lying when he tells you that you are the untrustworthy one. His psychological defense system has convinced him that his perception is reality. This creates a maddening dynamic where you find yourself defending against accusations that make no sense, while the real issues in his character remain hidden and unaddressed. Freud discovered that projection serves to protect the ego from unbearable self-knowledge, but it does so at the expense of genuine intimacy and truth in relationships. The key to recognizing projection is noticing when his accusations feel completely disconnected from your actual behavior, or when he attributes motivations to you that seem to come from nowhere. Pay attention to what he accuses you of most frequently and most passionately, because these accusations are likely confessions of his own psychological struggles. When he claims you are selfish, ask yourself if he consistently prioritizes his needs over yours. When he says you are emotionally unstable, observe whether he is the one creating chaos and drama. Projection reveals more about his character than any direct conversation ever could, because it shows you the aspects of himself that he finds most unacceptable and desperately needs to disown. Freud revolutionized our understanding of human motivation by revealing that sexual energy is the driving force behind most of our behaviors, even those that appear completely non-sexual. Sublimation occurs when this raw sexual energy is redirected into socially acceptable activities like work, art, sports, or intellectual pursuits. How a man sublimates his sexual energy reveals everything about his character, his level of psychological development, and his capacity for meaningful relationships. A man who channels his sexual drive into creative endeavors, meaningful work, or personal growth shows psychological maturity and the ability to delay gratification for higher purposes. Watch carefully how he expresses his masculine energy, because this tells you whether he operates from a place of integration or compulsion. Men who sublimate successfully tend to be passionate about their work, dedicated to personal improvement, and capable of channeling their intensity into building something meaningful. They can discuss sex openly without being crude. They appreciate feminine beauty without objectifying women. And they understand that sexual energy can be transformed into other forms of creative power. These men make better partners because they have learned to master their impulses rather than being controlled by them. Conversely, men who cannot sublimate effectively remain slaves to their immediate sexual impulses and tend to see everything through a sexual lens. They may be compulsively sexual, unable to form non-sexual friendships with women, or they may swing to the opposite extreme and become sexually repressed and uncomfortable with natural desires. Both extremes indicate poor psychological integration and predict problems in intimate relationships. Freud taught us that sexual energy is like fire. It can warm a home and cook a meal when properly contained, or it can burn down everything in its path when uncontrolled. The man who has learned to work with his sexual energy rather than against it demonstrates the kind of self-mastery that makes lasting love possible. Freud's most chilling insight about human psychology is that nothing we push into the unconscious ever truly disappears. It only waits in the shadows for the right moment to resurface with even greater force. The Return of the Repressed describes how suppressed emotions, memories, and aspects of personality will inevitably break through conscious defenses and manifest in unexpected ways. In relationships, this means that whatever a man has been hiding from himself about his character will eventually emerge, often when you are most vulnerable or invested in the relationship. The rage he has been suppressing will explode during your first real conflict. The selfishness he has been masking will surface when you need his support most. Early in relationships, men often present their best selves while unconsciously suppressing their shadow qualities. But psychological pressure always builds when authentic parts of the personality are denied expression. Watch for signs that he is working too hard to maintain a perfect image, because this artificial control cannot be sustained indefinitely. Notice if he seems unusually calm about things that would upset most people, if he claims to never get angry, or if his emotional responses seem muted and controlled. These could be signs that he is repressing significant parts of his emotional life that will eventually demand expression through explosive outbursts, passive-aggressive behavior, or complete personality shifts. The key to protecting yourself lies in understanding that repressed material always returns in distorted and often destructive forms. The man who claims he never gets jealous may become possessive and controlling. The man who insists he has no anger may become emotionally abusive, and the man who presents himself as completely selfless may reveal shocking levels of narcissism once he feels secure in the relationship. Freud taught us that psychological health requires integration of all aspects of personality, including the uncomfortable ones. A man who can acknowledge his flaws, discuss his struggles, and work consciously with his shadow qualities is far safer to love than one who maintains a perfect facade while his unconscious builds pressure toward an inevitable explosion. Conclusion. Now that you understand these two crucial elements, his unconscious expressions and his psychological patterns, you possess the power to see through any man's facade and recognize his true character before you invest your heart. The question is, will you trust what Freud's wisdom reveals to you even when it contradicts what you want to believe? And will you have the courage to choose men based on psychological reality rather than romantic fantasy? Subscribe to this channel for more insights that will transform how you understand yourself and the men in your life.